key part of the foreign aid budget is international food aid. There are many different sources of where this food aid comes from. And again, for purposes of this course, we're not getting into a lot of detail as to how all these programs work in a lot of particular detail. As I say, we're more concerned that you basically know that these are part of the food aid programs and that they all complement each other, but they're really coming from very different sources. The first one is one that you will hear quite a bit, is PL 480. And PL 480 in the U.S. government means Public Law 480. So this is legislation, core legislation of the U.S. Congress that goes back to the 1950s and 60s. And there are different titles that govern how food aid is used in development and humanitarian work. And this is the main source of food that comes to, for example, the UN World Food Program, as well to the large U.S. NGOs involved in development and humanitarian relief work. Then there's the Food for Progress Act of 1985. There's Agricultural Act of 1949, Section 416B, which has to do with the use of surplus food grown in the U.S. PL 480, by the way, is primarily, or used to be, surplus food. Then there's a very particular initiative that is started over the past couple of years called the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program. McGovern and Dole were two senators in the U.S. Senate who were key leaders and visionaries in raising the awareness of hunger and poverty in the U.S. Congress. Then there's another one called the Bill Emerson Humanitarian Trust. Bill Emerson was a congressman who died a number of years ago. He was also chairman for a while of the Select Committee on Hunger in the U.S. House of Representatives, and this humanitarian trust was named after him. There are sources of funding, some of which is managed by U.S. State Department, USAID, USDA in many cases, in the case of PL 480. But all of these different programs all come under U.S. foreign aid, very broadly defined. So I've mentioned U.S. security, national security strategy. You've got to look at, well, U.S. foreign aid, and this is the same for all countries. They will program and manage foreign aid based on their particular foreign policy concerns. From a national security point of view for the U.S. government, defense is the first pillar, diplomacy the second pillar, and then development. And this is post 9/11. It's somewhat differently defined than it was previous to 9/11. It was a major sea change in U.S. government policy concerning development since 9/11. There were two new initiatives that developed that were very unique and quite special in the world. The first one is the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the MCC. That was started by George Bush Jr. A few years back. I'll talk about that in more detail coming up. And then the second one, also started by President Bush Jr., was the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or commonly known as PEPFAR. These are two new initiatives that were initiated by the most recent Bush administration. So the Millennium Challenge Corporation is very different from USAID or the U.S. State Department. It's a separate organization within the executive branch of the U.S. government. They make 5-year grants. Countries are rewarded based on having a conceptual basis for the effectiveness of aid. And there's very particular eligibility criteria of good governance, economic freedoms, investment in people. These programs are designed by the government themselves. They're not just a normal grant kind of program where support is provided to the government and the U.S. steps back. The governments have to prepare these proposals themselves, and they have to show very particular results that are then tracked over the 5-year period. The countries design the programs themselves, again with support from the U.S. government. There are these benchmarks of progress that are very clearly defined. For each round of funding. In order to get the next round, the next tranche, if you will, the governments have to show that they've been able to achieve results to a certain level. There has been some frustration at the beginning of the program that it wasn't moving as fast as the U.S. Congress liked. It's a lot of money involved. Almost $8 billion has been programmed in 22 countries to date.